So our first speaker is back again with us, Andrew Bowerbank. We bring him back because he's so good. So he better not disappoint, Andrew. You know, he's the National Vice President of Sustainability and Energy with the WSP Group in Canada. He's a leading authority on clean technologies, high-performance building design, and low-carbon economics. He places strategic emphasis on marketing and communication initiatives to ensure client successes are celebrated and resources are in place to support growth. Just last year, he was named one of Canada's top 16 sustainability leaders through the Clean 50 Awards and has been a recipient of the Ontario Premier's Award for Leadership in Technology. And he's going to address opportunities for you folks to play a role and to build a career in this particular area in your own futures. So, Andrew Bowerbank, take it away.
Thanks, Bill. All right, can anybody hear me okay? Great, good morning. Pleasure to be here. As Bill mentioned, I gave this talk a few years ago. Some things have changed, and it's interesting times when it comes to climate change and new technologies and what's happening around the world, on the planet, environmentally, but also with infrastructure. A bit about WSP. If you don't recognize the logo or you haven't seen this before, it's fairly new in Canada, but it actually is one of the largest engineering firms in the world. We do a lot of work focused on everything from infrastructure, city building, bridges, roadways, buildings, you name it, we're involved in it. About 4 or 5 years ago, WSP was smaller in Canada, but it did a major effort to acquire a number of leading engineering firms and merge everybody together into one big group in Canada. And now we're working hard to take all that leadership and try and see if we can do something to make a difference so Canada's leadership really stands out in the marketplace. So what I want to talk about today, obviously the topic is resilience, but resilience is contained within a lot of efforts that are needed to be done around the world. I want to talk a bit about some of the issues that are before us right now, and then I'm going to get into some opportunities, talk about innovation and solutions, and then hit us with some big questions and opportunities at the end. As I'm going through this presentation, please try and keep in your mind if there's questions that you have, write them down, get ready. I'd love to kind of interact with you afterwards and talk to you a bit about some of your thoughts. The interesting thing for me in my career, I've always been very fortunate to be at the edge of trends in the marketplace. And I've focused my career around green buildings and sustainability and climate change. My main background's in industrial design. So I did a lot of work around automotive design, advanced manufacturing protocols. And there was a time about, I would say, about 18 years ago when I had the opportunity to do some work with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. And at the time, the TRCA, if you've heard of that agency, they look after the watersheds around the GTA and the river valley corridors. They came together at the time when Hurricane Hazel back in 1952, did some big damage around the GTA. It was the biggest hurricane at the time. I don't think we've had a storm of that magnitude since. A lot of people lost their lives. And to this day, TRCA's main effort is to always try to find that balance between the natural and the built environment. And about 18 years ago, when I started with them, they wanted to see if there's a way to encourage the City of Toronto and all the urban infrastructure around the city to look at new ways of developing infrastructure. And that was when the idea of a green building was first starting to come to the market. And I just started doing a lot of work with the then just emerging Canada Green Building Council. And I was on part of the team to actually bring LEED to Canada for the first time. And I worked in the very first LEED Platinum building in the province and many other great projects. And so the idea of being able to be there right at the very beginning of a wave has always been a key part of my career. I spent a bit of time working with Enbridge Gas and with Magna and a number of other big companies. And I found that for me a strategy is how do we get large companies driving change in the marketplace? Because big companies have the finances, they have the time, they have the resources to put towards these big innovative opportunities. Smaller companies don't. They've got to look at how they're going to survive from year to year from a financial standpoint, develop those new technologies. Governments, they're really good at setting policy and regulation. nonprofit organizations, they're good at advocacy and education. But unless you have big companies ready to step up and make the change, we're not going to tip markets the way we need to in response to climate change. So for me, being part of WSP now as one of the biggest companies in engineering consulting in the world, I want to always push that. Where can we go further? So for me, let's talk about the issue first, okay? Part of what I also have done in the past is I was the CEO for the World Green Building Council for about 5 years. And the World Green Building Council is the international body that all the national green building councils fit into. When I started, there were 8 countries as members of the World Green Building Council. Within 3 years, we grew that to 60 member nations, and I had a seat at the United Nations through the environmental program. That was an eye-opener for me, because working internationally in big markets, seeing what people are doing around the world, realizing that Canada is probably about 10 years behind Europe and Asia Pacific when it comes to technology and energy efficiency and others. Now, through the UN, there was a number of eye-opening things that I saw. If we look at the marketplace right now around the world, only about 18% of buildings can be classified as a green building. So as prolific as a program like LEED has been to change mindsets around construction and architecture and engineering, still only 18%. Transportation, only 8% uses something other than fossil fuels. Energy, 22% of the market only uses something other than fossil fuels, right? Very little renewables in the marketplace. And yet we look at these kind of numbers from the UN, stating that by 2050, there will be 50 megacities on this planet. Populations growing to over 9 billion people by 2050. Most of us will be living in urban centers. You look at the fact that around the world, almost 1 billion people are at risk of starvation. 1 billion people do not have access to fresh water, and over 1 billion people do not have access to energy. We can't fathom that here. It's very difficult to try and figure out what that means and how that feels. We have a lot of water here. We're trying to keep water at bay, right? We have a lot of energy. We have big cities. The opportunities now for us, is daunting, the things that we have to do. If we look at the fact that the UN states that we are going to need $7 billion a year just for agriculture adaptation. Water infrastructure, according to Boston Consulting Group, $2.3 trillion a year is going to be needed for that. Energy infrastructure, according to the World Bank, over $40 billion a year is going to be needed. Where is all of this money going to come from? Right? If we look at the energy market around the world, oil, 96% of all transportation is used by oil, right? 40% of the world's energy comes from oil. We are depleting our oil reserves so quickly. According to BP, we have 53 years left of proven oil reserves. And our consumption of gasoline is doubling. We look at coal. It's still the fastest growing fuel source in the world. You look at the import-export market between Russia, China, and India. The fact that the US is still planning an additional 159 coal power plants around the world. And this is the stuff that's causing all the problems when it comes to climate change and emissions. And the UN is asking us to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050. So with all the population growth going on, with all the mega cities coming on the planet, where are the resources coming from to build these cities? What's it going to take if we're building these cities and only 18% of buildings can be classified as a green building? The economies, for me, aren't working. And the new kicker for me is we are now at the beginning of what's called the fourth industrial revolution, where physical, biological, digital systems are making us move faster and faster and faster. You guys know, social media, everything to do with digital, we're moving so fast. And yet we have to reduce emissions by 80%. Otherwise, we are in big trouble. And the UN's latest report that just came out says we have 12 years. You know what I mean? This is not really working in my brain. I can't, even me, I've been doing this as my career, and I can't really fathom everything that's being said around all these issues. I think we're this pigeon. We're getting a wake-up call pretty quick, people. And unfortunately, it's you guys, this generation, that's got to try and figure out how to do this. There's an opportunity. There's definitely a lot of career opportunities out there, but it can't be just get a job, 9 to 5, make some money. You've got to find out how to solve the crap that we did and screwed up, unfortunately, right? Here's my main concerns. 1, resource management. We are just using our resources on this planet like it doesn't matter, like it's going to replace itself automatically, right? Energy demand, the amount of energy we need to do what we're trying to do, off the charts. Byproducts and emissions. We don't reuse. We reuse, recycle in our blue boxes at home, but we don't reuse materials properly. We don't look at deconstructing buildings. What's the full life cycle of a product or a building or a project? How do you decommission something and reuse resources? How do you reduce those emissions? And right now, I think there's barriers out there. We're not moving fast enough. We're not tipping the marketplace because we're not identifying market leaders out there. We actually talk innovation like it's the next big thing, but innovation, we're scared of it. We don't like change. We want to keep things the way it is. We want to make sure that we're taking home the paycheck, going home and having dinner with families, going out and party with friends. Change is difficult. And one thing we don't do in Canada at all, we suck at celebrating successes. A lot of times we celebrate success of a project when it's getting together, getting underway. Look what we're building. This is amazing. As soon as it's done, we go quiet, on to the next project. We've got to celebrate a project when it's finished to tell people what we did, not what we're going to do. We don't do that very well. And we don't understand return on investment. You cannot get big businesses and companies committing to things if we can't figure out what the ROI is. It doesn't mean it has to be money. It could be branding. It could be any kind of positioning in the marketplace, any kind of leadership position. Every company, every person has a different return on investment requirement. We need to find out what those are and tap into that and push the market to see if we can do this properly. This is not about saving the planet and hugging trees, because that's not getting the message across. What's the opportunity for people to get them to step up and say, okay, let's try something. Let's talk about low-carbon economics. If we look at some of the opportunities that are out there, one thing I do think is happening, which is a positive, is I think we've been stuck in a mindset of a definition of sustainability that's about 10, 15 years old. And even if I ask you right now, within a few words, what does sustainability mean? Is it easy to define? It's not. It's a little ambiguous. But sustainability still, as far as we've defined it, is about things like conservation, protection, it's sustainable energy. It's, these kind of terms are okay, but for me, unless we get economics, environment, society all working together, we're not going to create a solution. We've got to make sure that people, planet, and profit are all working. And this started off as the triple bottom line, that's what this is, as an academic exercise. Now it's actually becoming a reality where you see great companies, and I'll call out TD. TD does a great job in this space, trying to make sure that the value system and the idea of the triple bottom line becomes a reality. There's a lot of great companies out there doing this kind of work. We need to push that more. We need to learn from these experiences, and we need to share it with others. It doesn't always have to be competitive. If we're working together and moving the yardstick at the same time, the whole market benefits from that. Like Elon Musk with Tesla. He gave away all of his patents so that the entire market of electric vehicles can move up. It's the companies themselves that learn how to compete and work together to figure out where the benefit is to those companies. But the market shifts, right? This is a great picture for me. This is was the UN conference for the Paris Accord when it was signed. 198 leaders from around the world got together, all proud because they signed the Paris Accord. These are all government leaders. Now, when would a government leader stand up in front of the world and say, hey, we're going to do this, if they don't think they have the backing of industry and people that are going to vote for them next time around? For me, the message is not the fact that 198 global leaders got together to sign the Paris Agreement. For me, the story is that the markets are already moving in this direction. If you look at the amount of money that's being invested, the World Bank investing $29 billion a year just in climate change adaptation. China is the largest investor into renewable energy in the world. You look at the fact that Saudi Arabia is now establishing the world's biggest mega fund at $2 trillion specifically to get off oil independence, or oil dependence, sorry. In the US, with all the problems going on down there politically, the industry has stepped up and putting huge amounts of money into clean technologies, green buildings, infrastructure. And our own Mark Carney, Canadian man, is now the head of the Bank of England, and he's pushing investors in the trillions into new clean technologies that help get us off climate change problems that we're seeing today. So there's a lot of stuff happening around the world. Is it enough? No, it's still not enough. These numbers are big, but globally speaking, from an economic standpoint, they're not big. We've got a lot more we've got to do. In Canada, we've had a lot of success federally. And my problem now is, are we going to be able to sustain this? I used to be a councillor at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM, for about 6 years. And we got an additional $125 million specifically for climate change programs. And this money here, the municipal fund, is cities and municipalities across Canada can work with FCM to tap into this kind of money to look at new programming opportunities. So if $125 million is added to the fund, that means municipalities are going to start asking for developers and builders and businesses to start doing things within their communities that will address climate change. We're seeing that happen already. Both Toronto and Vancouver are both committing to zero-emission buildings by 2030. And Vancouver wants to be run all by renewable energy. That's going to be difficult, but that's their goal. The fact that the municipalities are stepping up leadership-wise to do that, that impresses me. And I'm hoping we can get collaborations across government, businesses, and academia to help make this happen. We need to look at the opportunities around responsible leadership. I talked a bit about how businesses need to step up and start shouting louder about what they're doing to give confidence to the marketplace. But this issue around speed, about how fast we are moving in the marketplace, and we're doing it without thinking. We're just moving because digital systems allow us to. We've got to figure out how we're going to be the watchdogs of all this process. That's the new definition of sustainability for me. We're not stopping change. We're not stopping fourth industrial revolution. We're not telling people to slow down. We want you to be accountable for the work that you do. Can you conserve? Can you be regenerative? The idea of a circular economy. Have you guys heard of that term, circular economy? It's a natural system where whatever you use, you readapt and you create a cycle of reuse. That's the way nature does it very, very well. How do we learn from that kind of circular economic principle? I talked a bit about my career and how I found really good success getting in front of market trends. You know, one of the things I was very proud of, is over the years, I've been hosting these different workshops with industry leaders. And starting way back in 2010, after my term with the World Green Building Council, I started pulling groups of people together, all C-suite executives, and started talking about the issues of the day. Back then, we started off with low-carbon economics. We then went on to electric vehicle opportunities. And for me, getting people in a room that are decision makers to try and look at ways of doing things is important. But if you don't do something with that information, that's the problem. So I'll give you an example. The electric vehicle report we did back in 2011, we ended up working with PowerStream, who was the second largest utility in the province, to establish the electric vehicle program. We got the very first Nissan Leaf in the country and developed an actual electric vehicle test program for that utility. We work with the province of Ontario to actually create an infrastructure program for them. The idea here is get people together, publish the information, start doing projects. We did the same thing around green healthcare. For me, it got really exciting about 3 years ago when I hosted a large workshop down at the province's Investment and Trade Center. And we got together with some of the biggest companies in the country. At the time, I was working with Ellis Don, one of the biggest contractors in the country. We had BASF, WSP was there, Cisco, Enbridge, Avison Young Real Estate, Cement Association, Mitsubishi. We all had the resources to put into new ideas and opportunities. So we published this action plan. And the action plan came out in June 2016. You can still download this on the website. If you want to get this, you can see me later. But the action plan was simple in concept, but difficult in execution. It was around developing pilot projects to net zero energy or carbon neutral. Not an easy thing to do. How do we account for the carbon that's emitted during construction and operations of these buildings? Because no one's doing that. It's the strangest thing for me. We want to operate our buildings as energy efficient as possible, but we don't even pay attention when we're building it. How much cement is going into it? How much propane is being used to heat the facilities when it's cold out and the construction workers are working? How much carbon emissions is being emitted from the big trucks that are delivering materials to site? How far is that distance going with those trucks? What's the time? All these things no one counts for. So we created this tool, a carbon accounting tool. We got $2 million from the federal government to create this app-based tool that can be used by the client and the contractors to track everything that happens on that project. So now we can start moving towards carbon neutral buildings, not just net zero energy. And finally, and the other one is testing and verifying technologies. A lot of times you have a developer or a builder who might have an interest to do something better, but if they're going to own their facilities for 30, 50, 80 years, are they going to want to try a technology they've never heard of before? Probably not, because they need to have confidence in it. They got to know that the warranties are going to be there for the long term. So how do we as big businesses give confidence to those developers that it is going to be a technology that you can adapt? We have to take on some of that responsibility to do that. So that was part of that program as well. And then you've heard me talk about return on investment and trying to find that for the clients. So some of the outcomes of this, net zero energy, if you guys are aware of this, it's a big growing market coming from Europe and Asia Pacific specifically. And you look at the Canadian marketplace just getting into this. Now, net zero energy is generating as much energy on site as you use. It's grid tied, so you still use grid power, but you want to put back what you use. There's different versions of net zero energy, but that's the gist of it. Very, very difficult to achieve. I worked on the very first one in Ontario at Mohawk College, the very first institutional net zero energy building. I think I got more gray hairs during this project than any other one to date. There's a lot of work going into doing a net zero energy building. But you know, the requirement now, if we are going to meet the UN's requirement of an 80% reduction of emissions by 2050, we did a calculation. That's like every single building in this country, at minimum, LEED Platinum. At minimum. And if one building gave me gray hairs, how the heck are we going to do this across communities and cities? It was a great success story, and we published a report on it. But again, we need to tip the market. We need to get more people educated on how to do this stuff. You look at this stadium that's being built. Look how much cement is going into this, right? When you look at something like this and you realize that cement is one of the biggest emitters of carbon emissions in the planet, and yet we use so much cement and concrete, it's unbelievable. China is actually running out of usable sand for cement, believe it or not. You can look that up. It's not a joke. So now it's becoming a black market item, getting the right kind of sand. It's crazy. So we needed to start tracking this stuff. And we worked on Canada's very first carbon neutral building. And this was at the Evergreen Brickworks. If you guys are familiar with that site, it was their kiln barns. They're turning into an international event center. What was great about this project is it's a heritage building. So when you have some of it, the building that we want to keep in place, that's already a good carbon neutral target because you're not, bringing in new materials. You can reuse things on site. The thing that was difficult for this project above anything else was the mechanism to track everything that happened on site so we knew a real accounting of the carbon emission during this process. It was daunting. The Excel spreadsheets gave me a headache. It was crazy. And that's why we started creating this tool I was telling you about to make it more easier app-based system. But now, they're celebrating this project, and they're doing events in it, and hopefully that story keeps going. That's what Evergreen is really good at, is telling that story for future generations. And for me, I talked about the idea of this carbon tool. It really is about life cycle assessment. You start at design, you go to construction, you work with the owner for facilities management, and then you deconstruct the project at the end of life. Right now, our industry is set up to work in silos. You've got your architects and your engineers, you've got your developers, you've got your waste experts, you've got your energy experts. Everybody works in different silos. if we need to figure out life cycle processes for carbon neutrality, the problem is already right there in the way the market is structured. How are we going to change that? How are we going to break down these silos so we get cross-sector collaborative opportunities? And I think we've really got to think about how we do that, how we talk to each other across sectors. One of the challenges that we found when we were doing the Brickworks project, just these things alone are very, very quick hits that we saw. You know, the issues around there's no metrics or mechanisms to actually meter the energy and transportation. We had to come up with our own systems for that. The materials and construction. We have to ask material suppliers for what's called EPDs, Environmental Product Declarations. That tells us that material, whatever it is, glass, wood, gypsum, what is the carbon environmental impact? And you have to have that third party verified by Environment Canada, I believe it's Environment Canada that does that. And so you have to have that done. And it's a lot of work to get your product a formal EPD. So now we have to ask clients and material providers to get an EPD. We've got to catalog it. We've got to save it. And it's a headache. And we don't even know yet when it comes to demolition and deconstruction, what's the impact of that? So there's so much to do. This might be a job opportunity, a career opportunity, getting into this kind of stuff to figure this out. The big thing for me, now when I talked a little bit around the event that I did a few years ago for the Carbon Impact Initiative, we just did another one this past Friday, and it was around urban agriculture. And why is a guy who's known for buildings and climate change in cities talking about urban agriculture? So it was a really great event. We had a completely full house. And the best thing about this is I could not get participants, it was all industry, with some academia and government. I could not get people to stop talking. Now you look at some of these numbers, and we're trying to deal with climate change from a buildings and energy standpoint and transportation. According to the UN, 51% of our climate change impact is as a result of agriculture, specifically animal agriculture. This is not cows burping and farting. This is the processes required for mass production farming, transportation, energy, the animals, the feedstock, the amount of land that's being taken up just for feed for these animals is astronomical. If we could reduce the animal impact of agriculture, we would have no more hunger issues for us on this planet. You look at the global water consumption. The issues that are happening right now are so severe when it comes to agriculture, we don't know how to change. But we're trying to figure this out. This is the project that we met about on Friday. This is just an architectural rendering, but the idea now is, how do we create an indoor urban vertical farm project at large scale, commercial scale? And how do we create an innovation center so that we can demonstrate the technologies that businesses will need to drive new urban agriculture projects? Now, when you look at this statement by the UN, I've heard this many times. That makes me nervous. By current farming practices, if we're going to feed the 9 billion people by 2050, we need land the size of Brazil, and it physically does not exist on this planet. The only thing we can do is figure out urban agriculture opportunities and get ourselves off of the heavy meat diets that we're on right now. 2 years ago, I went vegan. That's it. Did it. And I got to tell you, healthy-wise, unbelievable. The amount of work that your body takes just to process food and dairy, we're actually what's called a frugivore. We're like gorillas, silverback gorillas. That's all they eat is plants. Look how big they are. The idea that we need protein from animals to survive, no, that's false. There's more protein in broccoli than there is in a steak per ounce, believe it or not. Have you ever heard of anybody being in the hospital because of protein deficiency? Bullshit, right? So we have an opportunity now to change diets, change practice, change the way we do things. And I tell you, if you've been to A&W and had the Beyond Beef Burger, man, that thing is good, right? There's opportunities. Now, this project here, as I mentioned, we had this event on Friday specifically for this. I've been involved in this project for 3 years now to get it off the ground. It's finally starting to happen. If everything goes well, we're going to design phase early next year. But what I like about this, now check this out. This is like the electric vehicle stuff I was talking about. Now, when I was doing the electric vehicle market, at the time, you had a car plugging into a building, getting energy off of a grid. And yet, 8 years ago, a car manufacturer and a home builder and a utility have never had to talk before. So the problem is we're working in silos. We're not learning how to collaborate cross sectors, but we need to make these big changes that are required. In this project here, this is a net zero energy, water, and waste building. That's the first target. So that means zero water, zero waste, net zero energy. So it's a cycle, right? Circular economy idea. We grow the plants, we test the technologies, we use robotics and AI for harvesting, we have classrooms in here, we have event space, we have a restaurant to sample food, we have office space for industry, and everybody collaborates together. We have some people that want to be experts at green buildings, they're in here. We have people that want to be experts at urban farming, they're in here. We're testing those new technologies so we can push that market, right? We have you later on today, I believe you got vertical farm ideas being presented. You know, there's how do we help these smaller companies grow bigger in the marketplace? Because we got to hit hard and we got to go big. This is not the only places that we're doing this. This is, again, a emerging trend that we need to pay attention to. I've been talking about this for probably 8 years in my keynotes. This is Dixon DePommier from Columbia University. First person I heard present this. And his idea is you create these vertical pods, and you have a market garden down below where you sell the produce you sell above, and you put these at every 12 blocks within a city core. Great idea. It's been moving ever since. You get this idea here. It's not really a new idea as much as it is new technology. Anybody know where this is? Machu Picchu, right? Look at this little area right here. Doesn't that look a lot like this vertical farm concept? So it's applying new technologies to old ideas. Las Vegas, this is a vertical farm plan for there with renewable energy driving what's happening. Look at this one here in Singapore. This is for a design competition. This one here, Perkins & Will, one of the most well-recognized architectural firms in the world, submitted this as part of a design competition for a vertical farm concept for London, England. I don't know if I'm going to put cows on a building, but, you know, good for South Korea for giving it a shot. Again, the idea of submitting for design competitions. This stuff is moving quickly. This is the very first large-scale vertical farm, probably in the world, in Dubai. Why Dubai? Tell me why. Someone. Say it again? That's right. No arable land, how are you going to farm? You can't farm there, but it's getting more and more densified. If they start growing plants and food in a local area, it's a market, it's an opportunity, but also you're feeding people at the same time. This opened up earlier this year. This one here is the one that sort of drove a lot of new ideas towards a project that we're putting together. This is the World Food Building currently under construction in Sweden. It's called, the group that's putting it together is called Plantagon. What I love about this project is the south side of the building is where they grow the food and plants for feeding the communities. The north side of the building is office space that's rented out to companies. Now, plants give off what? Oxygen. Humans give out what? Right? But so it's a circular system within a building. So now you've got a healthy indoor environment, air exchange. What happens now is the landlord for this building can offer premium rents for the offices that want to be involved in this. So it's the idea of return on investment happening. We're creating the marketplace for something by bringing multiple sectors together to look at opportunities. That's what I like about this project. We start talking about innovation and change and what we need to do in the marketplace. For me, coming from Ellis Don as a construction company, we need to figure out a way to really advance the construction sector. It does not move fast at all as far as change, but there are groups like Ellis Don and PCL and Bird and all these other construction companies are trying to make a difference with virtual design and construction, with BIM technology, the idea of prefab modular systems to reduce waste. What's coming up right now is the idea of masswood timber construction. This is the AGO, Arc Gallery of Ontario, down in Toronto that we were involved in, that Ellis Don was involved in. But the idea here is that if you think about some of the older buildings in downtown Toronto, they are all these big post and beam structures, beautiful, right? We haven't done that in a long time. Now we're getting back into that. Why? Because wood sequesters carbon. And it's a renewable resource if you do it sustainably and you harvest it properly. So you embed and sequester carbon within the materials, you reduce the emissions of that building itself from a materials, which is called stage 3, embedded energy within materials. You have a good story. I toured a really amazing facility in northern Quebec, the Nordic manufacturing plant. And what they do is they have their own forest that they harvest the trees, they replant and harvest, and right there on the spot within the manufacturing plant, they go through the whole process of taking a tree into these what's called glulam beams. And just beautiful stuff. You can make any kind of configuration you want and span any space. It's actually a better technology. And a lot of times, in fact, we have to identify when something is a better technology. It might cost a bit more at the beginning, but economies of scale and time will bring that down. And we're already seeing many, many buildings in Canada. UBC, for example, has the tallest 18-story mass timber building in North America, I believe, at 18 stories. We're doing some stuff in waterfront Toronto now. A lot of projects are trying to figure out how to incorporate mass timber construction in their projects. For me, as an industrial designer, I love this kind of stuff because there's a study right there, biophilic design, where humans have an innate need to be near nature. Whether we know it or not, when we're in this kind of building here, we see no sunlight, there's no plants. Sooner or later, we're going to have to go outside for a breath of fresh air. We need to be near something green. We need to see something crawling on the ground. We need to see animals and things happening. So how do we, if our cities are getting bigger and more denser and more people and populations, it's so easy just to make everything concrete. How do we make sure that we have that connectivity to nature as our urban centers are developing? You look at some of these pictures, everything from green walls to medical centers, just to outdoor spaces within urban environments, to indoor waiting areas in offices. The feeling of being near nature calms people. And I think we need to make sure we're incorporating that. And the more plants, the more oxygen, and the more CO2 scrubbing that's done naturally. We need to learn how to naturalize our city environments. Now we're talking about the next step for me, and this is now integrating the digital world and what we are trying to do with buildings, with infrastructure, with transportation. We must get smart. And what I mean by that is intelligent building systems. How do our buildings understand how to communicate with each other? We can't create buildings that are standalone systems anymore. They've got to integrate with the community around it. A building has to talk to another building adjacent to it to share energy loads. We need to talk and communicate with transportation systems. How do the buildings allow us to adapt our businesses, because the infrastructure there, the Internet of Things, big data, is all integrated within the projects. If we can allow ourselves to communicate, we can reduce our energy demand. Everything has to work together as a system. We're here talking about resiliency, and resiliency to me is also that next big thing. It's not just resilient planning in response to climate change. It's also resilience around safety and security of the self, of the person, of the family. It's adaptive reuse. How do we make sure buildings can adapt when either it's the end of its purpose of original design is done, or if you're in a home or an apartment or a condo, how do you make sure people can age in place so they don't have to move into an old folks' home when they turn 70 or 80 years old? Social integration, how do we make sure the communities are interacting so people are talking. We're not just segregated into our rooms, into our buildings. We need to communicate and talk to each other, because that's about resiliency, communication. And cost of living. Vancouver is all up in arms right now because people cannot afford to live in downtown Vancouver. So resiliency is social, economic, environmental. It is, again, that triple bottom line mechanism and strategy we talked about earlier. Right? Now, bigger picture. For me, really talking about this. This has to be on your minds all the time. How are we going to reduce our emissions by 80% by 2050? And the reason why I think it's so important for us to think about it, because I think Canada has an opportunity to lead the market globally on this. We are very well respected as being collaborators, and I have had firsthand experience on that. Right? We're also excellent innovators. Our businesses are not necessarily good at carrying through long term, but we are good at upfront innovation. So if we can allow ourselves to understand and figure out through all these different ideas around market transformation, and we can embrace that as Canadians, we then go to the global marketplace, and the national return on investment will then start to come together. And it's going to take a generation like you guys to figure that out. For us at WSP, we've launched a new campaign called Future Ready. Future Ready, we're trying to figure out how to make Future Ready an actual business plan, not just a campaign. The idea here is how do we help our clients understand what's needed for the future? Because there are things out there that are unknowns, there's questions that we don't even know what to ask yet. But I think we've got enough people with brains at WSP to try and figure this out. We've got scientists, engineers. In Canada alone, we have 8,000 employees. My division at sustainability, it's the biggest one in Canada. We've got 140 people on staff. Internationally, we have 42,000 employees. If we can make something like Future Ready a key driver for us as a major company, well, then maybe we can help our clients figure out what they need to do for next steps. So you guys need to keep asking questions. Challenge your future employers. Don't sit back and just take a paycheck and go home. Find out how you can make that difference, because we got some big, hairy, audacious goals that we need to try and meet. Otherwise, we're going to be in big trouble. And I'm sorry to say it. But I've been at this for a very long time. And my God, if we don't do something soon, I don't know. So a little bit of doom and gloom, but a lot of good opportunities as well. And hopefully you see that. That's pretty well it. Do we have any questions? I'm hoping. Let's have some discussion. Thank you. Thank you. It's going to be one or two questions. I like questions. We got one back there already. Yeah.
Great.
Hi. Thank you
Yep.
for all the explanation. I'm recently graduated from the Sustainable Business Management program.
Great.
And this year we had the opportunity to go to TRCA Living Campus, which
Yep.
is in Bong.
Yes.
They have a great initiative there.
They do.
They're trying to build a model for houses,
Yeah.
sustainable, mainly sustainable, like out of the grid, great models. But they have been having troubles bringing that to the construction
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah.
So it's they have been had problems bringing that, or the business case for the construction area. So
Yeah.
I just want to know how do you tackle that with like all of this initiative if the industry is not following? So.
Yeah, I think it's amazing you asked that question, because the Living City campus, that whole area, that was actually my project 15 years ago. So the archetype house now that's on site, that was my project. My offices were actually in the Earth Rangers building. So that's a 300-hectare site dedicated to green buildings, renewable energy. In fact, it's got the largest renewable energy training center in the country at 1 kilometer long. How many people knew that? One hand. Anybody knew that they had the biggest renewable energy training center in the country? That's the problem with what TRCA is struggling with. They're a not-for-profit government agency who strictly, their job is watershed protection. But they're trying their best to get the message out about what's needed around green building design. The Earth Rangers building was built by Husky Injection Moldings and Robert Shad. But again, no one knows enough about that facility. If people don't know about it, who wants to invest in it? So what we have to try and do collectively is find these sites that are doing these great things. And we need to start celebrating those successes. And again, unless the success is celebrated, the awareness is there, the return on investment is not going to be seen, and industry is not going to step up. These are the barriers I was talking about at the beginning. That's a phenomenal site, a great opportunity. But unless we figure out how to get people up there talking about it, it's also a fair drive outside the city, so you've got to take a car to get to it. That's already not sustainable. We need something within the urban fabric as well. But we also have to influence different stages of development, whether it's rural, suburban, urban, not one answer size fits all. So I think there is a place for the Living City campus for sure, but how do we now connect these as what's happening maybe at Waterfront Toronto, for example, right? Or with academic leadership. And there has to be that network around that. So I'm hoping they're still going to be able to pull that off and do a good job at it, but that's collectively how we have to kind of figure that out together. Right? Next question? Yep, Bill?
Hi, hello. I have a question, but first I want to follow up with an observation that I've had so far. You have really great ideas and of potentially of how to increase like green housing and like green sustainable buildings globally. The point of observation that I'm making is the fact that you see, it seems like the method that you're using is kind of collaborating. Let's say with building a building, you would probably use cement and concrete, right? Mm-hmm. With that being said, I've done some research on my own, and I've found out that a cubic meter of hemp concrete absorbs about 165 kilograms of carbon. Mm-hmm. So rather than making like a building sustainable with like whatever vertical farming, why not go to the root of the problem and change the material? Yeah. And the question is, are you aware of this kind of stuff, and are you doing anything about this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so the hempcrete product you're talking about specifically, I actually worked to bring that to Canada about 6 years ago. The problem with hempcrete is the way hempcrete works is you take the cellulose fiber from a marijuana plant, and the leftover cellulose fiber, you grind that up and you combine that with lime. And that creates a very strong, sturdy, well-insulated product that is probably 80% natural. It's a great product. The problem with it is there's only 3 ways of applying it. You have to combine it into blocks, cinder blocks style. You can pour it into cavities and let it harden that way, okay? Or you can put it within a wall cavity, like a 2x4 kind of wall cavity. It doesn't work well large-scale commercial. There's not enough of it, and the curing processes doesn't work. It works great for single-family homes. If you want to do a custom home, it works great. The market right now doesn't allow it to transfer over to commercial-scale buildings. So if we're going to do something like a stadium or a hospital, you can't use it. The most they've been able to do now is a small department store in London, England, where the technology was invented, and they've got it using for that. Or things like, I think, as a winery, because the insulation factor is really good for protecting wine. But there's one-off custom processes. So part of the concern is, how do we go from innovative idea, how do we take that to commercial scale so we can adapt that for all use? I love that product. That's why I got involved with it. And I actually built quite a few homes with that, working with clients, right? But again, there was no mechanism to take it to scale. It just was not feasible or possible, quantities and everything else. So we need to figure out, maybe that's one solution, but what are other ones to start chipping away at the big commercial buildings that we need to? Make sense? Yeah.
Hello. I'm just wondering how to make larger corporations more accountable for their waste management, because there was even a study done with Tim Hortons, Starbucks, and they put like trackers into cups, and only 1 out of the 10 of them made it to a recycling facility. Yeah. And I also part-time work for Starbucks, and like some stores don't even have recycling, and those stores that do, they don't actually recycle. It's like a pseudo-recycling box, like it goes in the garbage. I know. So yeah, even like the one here on campus, I don't think it goes in recycling. So like, how does that start?
You and me both. I want to know that answer too. It's not easy.
Yeah, and like there's a outsourced company called Quaza for Starbucks that comes in to look at how we keep things clean and how we like manage that. But like there's nothing for waste management.
Nope, I agree. And I actually don't have an answer for you. I've tried that myself. How do we increase that? Even when I was working at Ellis Dawn, in the big offices, the problem was same thing, is that the cost and time and people and effort it takes to do all that recycling, no one wants to make that investment. We've got to figure out how to make it more of a regulatory requirement from the government. That's what they do in Europe, where you actually get penalized big time if you are caught not recycling properly. We don't do that here properly, right? We say it, we got blue boxes outside, and we kind of do it as a family. But again, it's the same idea when you're asking about the hempcrete product. We need to push things at scale. We need big changes. We need, like you said, big companies have to step up for that. And a lot of times they'll do things where it makes them look good in the marketplace, but if they're doing things no one knows about it, they don't want to do it quite as much, right? It's the same thing like if you buy a home. You go out and buy a home and it's Energy Star certified, right? It's a great home and maybe LEED certified home. Oh, but it's going to cost you another $20,000 specifically for that, even though you're going to make that back over time on your energy bill. A home buyer would rather buy a nice, beautiful granite countertop than pay for the cost of insulation because they can't see the insulation. So these are the problems that we have to deal with, right? How do we make it so that the companies and the people, everybody benefits from it in the long term? And again, I don't have that answer yet. Please come up with one when you get into your career. Good. Next, yeah, Bill. Yeah.
Hi. So I have a question on CO2 emissions.
Sure.
You talked heavily on trees being the solution. I just have a question on, are there any other technologies being explored that are being put into buildings to mimic the how trees suck up the CO2? Is this, because this would be a big thing.
Yeah.
It takes a lot for trees to grow. It takes a long time. Are there any other technologies?
There are some really good ones coming out of, especially in Canada anyways, out of Alberta. And the idea of sort of scrubbing the air, taking out the CO2 that way. But the cost to create these plants, these physical structures, to do that is just cost prohibitive. When you look at how natural systems recycle things on its own, the best thing we can do is figure out how to integrate natural systems and make sure that our biological systems, the natural diversity, biodiversity around our cities has to be as vibrant as possible to encourage that. It's not so much what technologies are there, but what systems can we use and adapt to reduce our overall emissions impact. Simple things like getting off meat as a major diet source, getting onto public transit and not driving a car, getting onto electric vehicles, buildings that are very energy conservative, right? Hyper efficient is what I want to call them. So it's not any one, what's the one technology solution? There is no such thing. There are ideas out there. We don't even understand energy storage yet from a utility scale. So we're putting renewables in the marketplace from wind turbines and solar, but that's a fluctuating energy source. What our communities are built on is base power load, like coal plants, which thankfully it's out in Ontario. You got nuclear, you got natural gas. Nuclear does not emit carbon, but they have all these other kind of problems. So that's always in discussion right now. So for me, it's how do we change and how do we adapt our system so we allow for the fluctuation power loads? And how do we store the energy so that stored energy becomes a base power supplement? And you have to look at all the systems together, not one technology solutions, right? Good.
Over here.
I have a question regarding how can we spread awareness about this problem, as it's very important.
Yeah.
I like how you used how to become vegan and stop animal use because it's very efficient. And from today, I'm gonna become vegan because I like that idea.
Champion, awesome.
And yeah, I want to know how you use this. How do you spread this problem? How do you make it aware in your personal life? Because I would like to affect people surrounding me as well.
Yeah.
But yes, the reason why I'm asking this question, because you say by 2050, right, we have to reduce by 80%.
Yeah.
For me, I only have 25 years to help you with this goal, because I'm going to be graduating by 2025, like graduating from college.
Yeah.
So I only have 25 years to make this difference.
That's right.
So yeah, I want to, like in my daily life, how can I spread this awareness about this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we all have to find our own path and figure that out. But what I'm doing right now, I do this every week. I'm talking to people as much as I can to make people aware of every issue. And everything I talked about here, not everybody's going to like everything I say. Some people might love the green building talk. Some people might like the animal agriculture talk. Some people might like the energy talk. Some people might like the innovation. But whatever I can grab to get people to listen, I've got to do it. I've done everything from media blitzes to projects in the marketplace to social media stuff to speaking to publishing books and reports. You've got to find the way that will allow you and your voice to stand up with the people around you and spread that word as much as possible. I think for me, when you look at these kind of presentations, you might be good at public speaking yourself. One day, I didn't even know I was that good at it. It's not so that you're good at it, do you feel comfortable at it? And what do you enjoy, what are you comfortable doing? I feel comfortable being up here talking to you guys like we're at the bar having a beer, right? And for me, I remember I went to Germany about 12 years ago, and they had me do a keynote address for a big conference there. And in Germany, the conference centers are massive. And I was really late. My plane was coming in late, and it was so late that the limo pulled up in front of the conference center. And as soon as I opened the door, one person grabbed my luggage, one person was putting my lapel mic on, the other one grabbed my USB key and ran for the main hall where I was speaking. When I got to, I'd never spoken to an audience that big in my life. It was 1,000 people, not auditorium, but at row desks. So imagine how big that center is. And they throw me up on stage, and it was literally 8-foot drop, and my feet were like this. The screen was 150 feet wide and 50 feet tall. The audience was massive, and this light hit me, boom, and I went, rather than being nervous, I went, oh, yes, let's go. And the bigger the audience, the more I get off on it. So for me, if that's what I'm good at, that's what I like to do, well, let's do this. This is my thing. So now what's your thing? How do you spread your message? You got to find that path, and you got to find your passion. That's the other thing. What's the passion? What drives you? Because you can tell I love this stuff, right? It's my passion. So I talk about it. I get people riled up. Let's go. Let's do something, right? That's what you got to do.
Hi there.
Hey.
Let's say that we have an idea for a new technology or process to, I don't know, let's say reduce carbon emissions.
Yeah.
What are some ways that we can help to fund development of that idea to make it commercially viable?
Sure. So first of all, we're very lucky in Ontario and in Canada that we have some great agencies that help out with this stuff. So federally, we have Sustainable Development Technologies Canada, SDTC, and they will get into small emerging companies with new technologies that will help mentor those technologies. They'll provide money and seed financing to get going. In Ontario, we have a couple of great groups. We have the OCE, Ontario Centres for Excellence. They do it at a provincial level, and right now they're actually doing big calls for money right now for new technologies and ideas, and they have a real push on climate change adaptive technologies. But then you have groups like Mars, right? And there's a lot of stuff going on at universities and colleges as well, right? So I think it's a matter of finding these agencies that can help out. If you truly have a good idea, it's figuring out how do you articulate that in a business plan, how do you get it moving. College and universities are the best ways to get your technology started. Get it going here. Don't worry about your business plan. Just try and find something that works. Then when you graduate, hit the market, go to these agencies like OCE and SDTC and say, look, I've got this technology, I've got this idea. How do I fund that? And they will actually work with you to do that. They do it all the time. They're great groups. Yep.
Sometimes I feel like a batter for the Boston Red Sox against the Los Angeles Dodgers, if anybody's a baseball fan. It was like Andrew just threw a fastball down the center of the plate, and bang, I'm taking that thing downtown, because the next half of our presentation is going to be exactly on that particular topic. So, Chris, over to you.
I just have a quick question, Andrew. You
Chris
said
Hume, oh my God, I'm in trouble now.
No. You said at the beginning of your talk that Canada is 10 years behind Asia and Europe.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could explain why that is.
You know what, Chris? I don't know if I can explain the why. I can explain my observations. I talked about net zero energy, for example. Now, when I was at the UN and doing stuff with the World Green Building Council, I saw the net zero energy leadership in Europe and Asia Pacific. They've got that right. They know the formula. But it's not just net zero energy, it's hyper-efficient buildings. They're doing things now over there where all buildings, much like your cereal box, you have to put on your buildings at point of sale, your energy, your water, everything there, so that the purchaser can actually compare that to a building down the street. It forces the buildings to be as efficient as possible. We can't do that here. No one's, there's no way. Why? So part of my problem is when I see that kind of collaborative leadership and the way they're doing that to lead the marketplace, and they start getting it, defining net zero energy and making that work over there. I mean, obviously not all ideas in Europe are going to transcend well over to Canada. It's not the same marketplace. But there's enough ideas there that we need to pull those over. Is the ocean the barrier? I hope not. I don't know what the barrier is, Chris. I really don't. And I've been, like I said, I've done the first net zero energy building here, but they have hundreds of them over there, right? And it is a growing big market. I don't know what that barrier is. I wish I did.
Dan, you'll be our last questionnaire.
Oh, sorry.
Well, thank you once again, Mr.
Yeah.
Bowerbank. We really appreciate you coming to Seneca and to the Resilience Symposium. Question around political courage and leadership, and the role that we can play, whether it's at Seneca or beyond, in sort of filling the gap. Obviously, with 4-year election cycles, you have governments setting short-term priorities rather than looking at the long-term impacts of those decisions.
Yep.
How do we convince governments to look in the longer term, to think about those longer term returns on investments that stem from resilient projects and sustainable projects? How do we get them to change their thinking? What role do we have in effecting that change?
Yeah.
And also, specifically when we look at the great ideas that might come out of the next session, how do we catalyze those ideas? So it's loaded questions for you this morning.
Yeah.
Affecting change at the government level, and then affecting change to accelerate the ideas that are brought forward here today.
Engaging government has been the bane of my existence. I've tried so long. I mean, I've been involved in government federally and provincially. I did so much work with the past government, and you're right. Every 4 years, a cycle turnover. Everybody thinks very short term. The benefit we have is we have 3 levels of government: municipal, provincial, federal. And they never line up. Never do. And actually, that's a good thing. Because if something screws up at a provincial level, which it is right now, we have federal leadership that's actually still staying on course. And if one of those two go down, we've got municipal leadership, which is doing great work. So you have to look at where is the leadership at any one of those 3. A good example, if you look south at what's happening in the US, Trump even said, I know climate change is a problem. I'm not going to solve it. I'm not going to try. And he's going on with that, and that's what he says. But now what happens is industry leaders, the numbers I showed you from an investment standpoint, industry is stepping up. California is still staying on track with their targets. Washington State, same thing. So I think you say, fine, federal level, whatever, if you're screwing up and you're not going to take this on, then the state will. Here, same thing. If the province is screwing up, the federal wants to do it, you got to learn how to communicate and how to jump around because they're like children, right? And you got to say, fine, you're going to be short-term like that and you're going to be jumping all over the place. Go play with your rubber toy. I'll do my work over here and I'll come and play with you when I have a minute. And when they start hearing us telling them we don't care, we're doing it anyways, they're going to say, oh, okay, I need votes. What do you mean you're not paying attention to me? Then things are going to start happening, right? That's a short, quick overview, obviously simplified, but
Great strategy. Thanks, Andrew. And thank you so much for a wonderful presentation.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.